My wife and I lost everything during a storm. When I asked my only son for help, his wife interrupted, "You can stay as long as you want, as long as your gossiping wife lives on the street." At that moment, I walked to my car and brought out a surprise. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Oliver, and at 61 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing on my son's doorstep like a beggar. The rain was still dripping from my gray hair as I rang the doorbell, my wife Celine clutching my arm with trembling hands. Behind us, our old Honda Civic sat loaded with everything we had left, 3 suitcases, a few photo albums, and 37 years of memories that somehow felt heavier than all our lost possessions combined. Hurricane Elena had torn through our neighborhood like an angry beast. When we evacuated, we thought we'd be back in a few days. We never expected to return to find our house, the house where we'd raised Marcus, where Selene had planted her rose garden, where we'd planned to spend our golden years, reduced to a pile of soggy debris and broken dreams. The insurance company had been polite but firm. Act of God, they called it. Not covered under your current policy. 29 years of premium payments, and they dismissed us with a form letter and a sympathetic smile. Marcus opened the door, his face immediately shifting from surprise to concern. At 34, my son had grown into a successful man, wearing an expensive suit even at home, his dark hair perfectly styled. Behind him, their 2-story colonial gleamed with the kind of perfection that comes from having more money than you know what to do with. "Dad? Mom? What are you doing here so late?" Marcus stepped aside, gesturing us in. The warmth of the house hit me immediately, along with the scent of vanilla candles and that particular smell of new furniture and prosperity. I tried to find the words, but Selene spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, sweetheart, we lost everything, the house, the furniture, everything." My son's face went pale. He'd always been a good boy, sensitive like his mother. I watched him process the information, saw the exact moment the reality hit him. "The hurricane? But I thought you said the damage wasn't that bad when I called last week." "We thought so too," I said, setting down our suitcase. My back ached from loading and unloading our belongings 3 times today. First from the hotel when we ran out of money, then from Celine's sister's place when she made it clear we weren't welcome. And now here. The foundation shifted, the whole structure was compromised. "It's gone, son." That's when she appeared. Miranda. My daughter-in-law emerged from the kitchen like she owned not just the house, but the very air we were breathing. At 29, she was undeniably beautiful. Blonde hair always perfectly arranged, makeup flawless, even at 9 in the evening, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But there was something cold in her green eyes, something that had always made me uneasy during family gatherings. "What's going on?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and wasn't pleased about it. Marcus turned to her, his voice gentle but urgent. "Miranda, honey, my parents lost their house in the hurricane. They need somewhere to stay while they figure things out." The silence that followed felt like ice water in my veins. Miranda's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation, annoyance, disgust. She looked at our wet clothes, our cheap suitcase, the way Selena's hands shook from exhaustion and stress. "Of course," she said finally, but her smile never reached her eyes. "How long are we talking about?" I felt Selene tense beside me. My wife had always been intuitive about people, and she'd never warmed to Miranda the way she had to Marcus's previous girlfriends. Now I was beginning to understand why. "We're not sure yet," I admitted, hating how small my voice sounded. "The insurance situation is complicated, and we need time to find a rental we can afford on my pension." Miranda's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her designer handbag. "Well, we do have the guest room," she said, as if she were discussing the weather. Then her gaze fixed on Selene. "Though I have to say I hope there won't be any drama. You know how these small living situations can get tense." "What do you mean?" Selene asked softly. "Oh, nothing specific," Miranda replied with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "It's just that some people have a tendency to get involved in things that aren't their business. Gossip, you know?" And with my book club meeting here twice a week and Marcus's colleagues coming by for dinner parties, well, we have a certain reputation to maintain. The words hit like a slap. Celine stepped back as if she'd been physically struck. I felt rage building in my chest, hot, familiar, protective. My wife was the kindest woman I'd ever known. She volunteered at the church, brought meals to sick neighbors, and had never spoken an unkind word about anyone in her life. To call her a gossip was not just wrong, it was cruel. "Miranda," Marcus said, his voice carrying a warning. But she wasn't finished. "I mean, we can certainly help out family in need," she continued, examining her nails with deliberate indifference. "Oliver, you're welcome to stay as long as necessary, but honestly," with the way some people talk, she looked directly at Celine. "Maybe it would be better if your wife found somewhere else to go. I'm sure someone in her family would understand the situation better." The room spun around me. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight. This woman, this stranger who had somehow convinced my son to marry her, was telling me I could stay while my wife of 37 years should sleep on the street. Celine's face had gone white as paper. Her hands trembled as she reached for my arm. "Oliver, maybe we should just go to a motel." "With what money?" The words came out harsher than I intended. We'd spent our last $200 on gas and the hotel room we'd already vacated. Our credit cards were maxed from the evacuation expenses, and my next pension check wasn't due for 2 weeks. Miranda shrugged as if our financial ruin was a minor inconvenience. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do, don't you? I mean, at your age, you must be used to adapting." That was it. Something inside me snapped. I'd spent my entire adult life being reasonable, accommodating, swallowing my pride for the sake of peace. But watching this entitled, heartless woman humiliate my wife in her moment of greatest need awakened something in me I'd kept buried for too long. "I need to get something from the car," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Celine looked at me with confusion and worry. She knew that tone. She'd heard it exactly 3 times in our marriage, when a neighbor had cheated her out of money, when Marcus's high school principal had unfairly suspended him, and when the hospital had tried to deny her treatment during her cancer scare 5 years ago. Each time, I'd walked away calm and returned with a solution that changed everything. "I'll be right back," I told her, squeezing her hand. As I walked toward the door, I heard Miranda's voice behind me, sweet as poisoned honey. "Take your time, Oliver. We'll just be here getting to know each other better." The rain had stopped, but the air still crackled with electricity from the storm. I walked to our Honda, my hands surprisingly steady as I reached for the keys. In the trunk, hidden beneath our emergency supplies and Celine's carefully packed photo albums, was a leather briefcase I hadn't touched in over 3 years. Inside that briefcase was something Miranda didn't know about, something that would change the power dynamic in that house so completely, so devastatingly, that she'd probably wish she'd never been born. As I lifted the briefcase from the trunk, I could hear her voice drifting through the open window, still talking to Celine with that condescending tone that made my blood boil. She had no idea what was coming. Standing there in the driveway, briefcase in my hands, memories flooded back like water through a broken dam. I thought about Marcus at 8 years old, crying because the other kids made fun of his secondhand clothes. Celine and I had worked double shifts for months to buy him new sneakers and a decent backpack, eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so our boy wouldn't feel ashamed. I remembered his 16th birthday, when he'd wanted a car so desperately, but tried to pretend it didn't matter. We'd sold Celine's grandmother's antique dining set, the one she'd planned to pass down to her grandchildren, to buy him that used Toyota. The joy on his face when he saw it in the driveway was worth every sacrifice. Then there was college. State University wasn't good enough for Marcus's dreams. He wanted the prestigious business program across the state, the one that cost $43,000 a year. We refinanced the house twice, depleted our retirement savings, and I took a second job driving delivery trucks on weekends. Celine cleaned offices at night after her day job at the library. We aged 10 years in 4, but but our son graduated summa cum laude. The wedding had been another financial stretch. Miranda had insisted on the country club, the designer dress, the photographer who charged $8,000 for a single day. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, she'd said, though her family contributed exactly nothing while expecting the world. We'd borrowed against our life insurance policy to give our son the wedding his bride demanded. And through it all, through every sacrifice and sleepless night, Celine had been my partner. She'd never complained, never made Marcus feel guilty for the dreams that cost us our security. When he'd call home stressed about his new job, she'd spend an hour on the phone listening, encouraging, mothering him from 300 miles away. When Miranda had been difficult during the wedding planning, Celine had smoothed over every conflict, always taking the blame, always keeping peace in the family. Now I could hear Miranda's voice through the window, dripping with false concern. "I just think it would be easier for everyone if you stayed somewhere more appropriate to your situation. You understand, don't you, Celine? A woman of your background would be more comfortable somewhere simpler." My wife's response was too quiet to hear, but I knew she was probably apologizing, probably trying to make this easier for everyone else like she always did. She'd spent 37 years putting everyone's comfort before her own, and this was how she was being repaid. I opened the briefcase with steady hands. Inside, beneath the legal documents and corporate papers, was a folder marked Transition Plan, Confidential. I'd hoped never to need it, had prayed that Marcus would prove himself capable of handling the responsibility I'd given him. But listening to his wife's cruelty while he stood silent, I realized some lessons could only be taught the hard way. 3 years ago, when Marcus had been promoted to CEO of Meridian Enterprises, the entire family had celebrated. What they didn't know, what only I, my lawyer, and my accountant knew, was that Marcus wasn't the owner. He was the manager. I was still the majority shareholder, controlling 60% of the company that had grown from a small construction business I'd started in our garage 30 years ago. The decision to step back had been deliberate. I'd wanted to see if success would change my son, if he'd remember where he came from and who had helped him get there. For 3 years, I'd watched from the sidelines as he lived in luxury, driving cars that cost more than most people's annual salary, buying a house I couldn't afford to visit without feeling inadequate. I'd told myself he was just young, that he'd mature into gratitude. I'd made excuses when he'd started missing our Sunday dinners, when his calls became less frequent, when he'd begun introducing me as a retired contractor instead of my father at company events. I'd convinced myself that Miranda's coldness toward us was just personality differences, that love would eventually warm her heart. But watching her humiliate my wife, calling her a gossip, suggesting she sleep on the street, I realized I'd been deluding myself. Success hadn't changed Marcus. It had revealed who he really was. Or perhaps it had revealed what kind of woman he'd chosen to shape his character. The documents in my hands were more than papers. They were power. They were the ability to remind my son that everything he had, his position, his salary, his authority, came from the man whose wife he was allowing to be treated like trash. I closed the briefcase and took a deep breath. Through the window, I could see them in the living room. Miranda was standing with her arms crossed, looking down at Celine, who sat hunched on the couch like a scolded child. Marcus stood between them, but his posture said everything, turned toward his wife, not his mother. As I walked back toward the house, I heard Miranda's voice rise with barely contained impatience. "Look, Celine, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you have to understand this is our home. We've worked very hard to build the life we have, and we can't have disruptions." "What kind of disruptions?" I heard Marcus ask. "Oh, you know how older people can be," Miranda replied with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "They don't understand boundaries. They think family means they can just take over. Next thing you know, she'll be rearranging my kitchen, giving me unsolicited advice about how to run my household, telling everyone in town about our private business." Celine's voice was barely audible. "I would never—" "Of course you would," Miranda cut her off. "It's not your fault, really. It's just how people from your generation were raised. But Marcus and I have a certain standard to maintain. His colleagues, my friends, they expect a certain level of sophistication." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. Inside that briefcase was the power to destroy Miranda's world with a single phone call. I could walk in there and reveal that every bit of luxury she enjoyed, every ounce of status she lorded over my wife, existed because I allowed it to exist. But something held me back. Maybe it was the hope that Marcus would finally stand up for his mother. Maybe it was the desire to see if there was still some part of the boy I'd raised left inside the man he'd become. "Miranda, that's enough," Marcus said finally, and my heart lifted slightly. "These are my parents. They need help." "And I said we'd help," she replied smoothly. "Your father can stay here as long as he needs. I'm being perfectly reasonable." "What about my mother?" The pause that followed was heavy with tension. I could almost see Miranda choosing her words carefully, calculating how far she could push without losing control entirely. "Your mother is welcome too, of course," she said, her voice sugar-sweet with false generosity. "As long as she understands that this is our house, with our rules, and as long as she can manage to keep her opinions to herself." Another pause. Then Marcus spoke, and his words hit me like a physical blow. "Maybe that's fair," he said quietly. "Maybe we all just need to adjust our expectations." That was the moment I realized I'd lost my son completely. He was choosing her cruelty over his mother's dignity, her comfort over our need. The boy who'd once cried when his pet hamster died, who'd spent his allowance on flowers for Celine every Mother's Day, was gone. In his place was a man who would watch his wife humiliate the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his success. I turned the door handle, the briefcase heavy in my other hand. As I stepped inside, 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Celine's were filled with shame and exhaustion. Marcus's were guilty but defiant. Miranda's were calculating, probably wondering how long it would take to get rid of us entirely. What none of them knew was that I held the power to change all of their lives forever. And after what I'd just witnessed, I was no longer afraid to use it. I set the briefcase down on their polished coffee table with deliberate care, watching as Miranda's eyes narrowed at the worn leather, interrupting her perfect living room aesthetic. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. Celine looked up at me with confusion, while Marcus shifted uncomfortably near the fireplace, his expensive suit somehow making him look smaller than I remembered. "What's that, Dad?" Marcus asked, nodding toward the briefcase. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked around their home, really looked at it. The Italian marble floors that cost more than my yearly pension, the custom kitchen with appliances that could feed a small restaurant, the artwork on the walls worth more than most people's cars. All of it paid for with money that, ultimately, came from me. Miranda was watching me with barely concealed irritation. "Oliver, we were in the middle of a conversation about living arrangements. Could we please focus on finding a solution that works for everyone?" "Oh, we're going to find a solution," I said quietly, clicking open the briefcase locks. "But first, I think there are some things you need to understand." The first document I pulled out was the original incorporation papers for Meridian Enterprises, dated 28 years ago. My signature at the bottom, establishing myself as founder and sole owner. Next came the stock certificates, showing my controlling interest had never been transferred, never been sold, never been given away. Marcus frowned, leaning closer. "Dad, what is this stuff?" "This," I said, spreading the papers across their coffee table, like playing cards, "is the truth about your life, son. The truth about where your success really comes from." Miranda stepped forward, her designer heels clicking on the marble. "I don't understand what old business papers have to do with our current situation." "These aren't old papers, Miranda. They're current, very current." I pulled out the most recent quarterly report, the one showing Meridian Enterprises' net worth at $47 million. You see, when Marcus became CEO 3 years ago, everyone assumed he owned the company. The board thought so, the employees thought so, even Marcus thought so. My son's face had gone pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I never sold you the company, son. I never transferred ownership. I gave you the title, the salary, the authority to run day-to-day operations, but I remained the majority shareholder. 60% to be exact. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as understanding dawned on Marcus's face, saw the exact moment Miranda realized what this meant. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the color draining from her cheeks. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Marcus owns Meridian. He's the CEO. We've built our entire life around a salary I pay him," I interrupted, "around a position I gave him, around a company I built from nothing while you were still in high school." I pulled out another document, the employment contract Marcus had signed 3 years ago. "Read Section 4, subsection C," I told him. "The part about compensation and benefits being subject to board approval, the board that I control." Marcus sank into his leather armchair, the same chair they'd bought with his first bonus check, a bonus that came from profits my company generated. His hand shook as he read the contract he'd signed without really understanding. "You let me think," he started, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "I let you think you'd earned it on your own. I let you believe you were a self-made success story. I wanted to see what you'd do with power, how you'd handle responsibility, whether you'd remember the people who helped you get there." Miranda was pacing now, her composure cracking. "This is insane. You can't just... Marcus is your son. You wouldn't destroy your own child's career over a housing disagreement." "You're right about one thing," I said, gathering the papers. "He is my son, which makes what I witnessed tonight even more heartbreaking." White. I turned to Marcus, who was staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. 37 years ago, I married the most generous, loving woman I'd ever met. She gave up her dream of becoming a teacher to help me build a business. She worked 2 jobs so we could afford to send you to the best schools. She sold her grandmother's jewelry to buy your first car. She took night shifts, cleaning offices to pay for your college. My voice was getting stronger, steadier. She spent hours on the phone with you during your first year at Meridian, talking you through every challenge, celebrating every small victory. When you were promoted to CEO, she cried tears of joy and spent her grocery money on champagne to celebrate your success. Celine was crying now, silent tears streaming down her weathered face. She'd never asked for credit, never demanded recognition. She'd simply loved our son unconditionally, expecting nothing in return except basic respect. "And tonight," I continued, "I watched the woman you chose to marry tell my wife, your mother, that she's a gossip who should sleep on the street. I watched you stand there and let it happen." Miranda stopped pacing. "Oliver, you're taking this completely out of context. I never said she should sleep on the street. I was just suggesting..." "You were suggesting that the woman who sacrificed everything for this family wasn't good enough to sleep in a house paid for with money that comes from my company." The words hung in the air like smoke. I could see Miranda's mind racing, calculating, trying to find a way out of the hole she'd dug. But there wasn't one. Not this time. "How much?" she asked suddenly. "What? How much do you want? To keep quiet about this, to let things go back to normal? Name your price." The question hit me like a slap. After everything, after learning that her entire lifestyle was built on a foundation she'd never understood, her first instinct was to try to buy my silence. Not to apologize, not to show remorse for her cruelty, just to negotiate. "You think this is about money?" I asked quietly. "Everything's about money, Oliver. Don't pretend otherwise. You want us to grovel, to beg forgiveness for a simple misunderstanding. Fine. How much will it cost to make this go away?" I looked at my son, hoping to see some flicker of the boy I'd raised, some sign that he understood how wrong this was. Instead, I saw him nod slightly, as if he thought his wife's approach made sense. "Marcus," I said, giving him one last chance, "do you have anything you want to say to your mother?" He looked at Celine, then at Miranda, then at the documents scattered across the coffee table. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry this got so complicated, Mom, but maybe Miranda has a point about the living arrangements. This house is kind of small for 4 people, and you know how you sometimes, well, you do tend to get involved in things." That was the moment I realized my son was lost to me completely, not just influenced by his wife, but fundamentally changed into someone I didn't recognize, someone who could watch his mother be humiliated and blame her for it. I stood up, closing the briefcase with a sharp snap. You're right about one thing, Miranda. This is about money. It's about the money you've been spending that doesn't belong to you. It's about the lifestyle you've been living on my generosity. It's about the power you've been wielding that was never yours to begin with. I walked toward the door, Selena rising to follow me. "Where are you going?" Marcus called after us. "To a hotel," I said without turning around. "Don't worry about the cost. I can afford it. After all, I own a $47 million company." As we reached the door, I heard Miranda's voice, sharp with panic. "Oliver, wait! We need to talk about this reasonably." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. "You had your chance to be reasonable, Miranda. You chose cruelty instead. Now you get to live with the consequences." The last thing I heard as we stepped into the night was Marcus calling after us, his voice cracking with something that might have been fear. But it was too late for fear. The time for mercy had passed the moment his wife had called my Selene a gossip who deserved to sleep on the street. Tomorrow they would wake up in their beautiful house, surrounded by their expensive things, still believing they were in control of their destiny. They had no idea that their entire world was about to change forever. The hotel room was clean but modest, nothing like the luxury Marcus and Miranda were accustomed to, but it felt like a palace compared to sleeping on their living room floor. Celine sat on the edge of the bed, still processing everything that had happened. Her hands hadn't stopped shaking since we left their house. "Oliver," she said quietly, "did you really mean all of that? About the company?" I pulled the incorporation papers from the briefcase and handed them to her. Every word. "I've been the majority owner of Meridian Enterprises since the beginning. Marcus has been my employee, not my successor." She studied the documents with the careful attention she'd once given to library cataloging. After 37 years of marriage, she could read the truth in legal language better than most lawyers. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I hoped I'd never need to use it." I sat down beside her, suddenly feeling every one of my 61 years. I wanted to believe that success would make Marcus grateful, not entitled. I wanted to think that giving him responsibility would teach him humility. And Miranda? I thought she'd soften once she felt secure. I thought love would change her. I laughed bitterly. I was wrong about everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Dad, we need to talk. Can you come back in the morning?" I showed Selene the message. She read it and sighed. "He's scared now." Good, he should be. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying the scene in their living room, Miranda's cold dismissal of my wife, Marcus's passive acceptance of her cruelty, the way they'd both assumed I was powerless to do anything about it. By morning, I'd made my decision. I arrived at their house at exactly 9 o'clock, timing my visit to coincide with Miranda's usual morning routine. I wanted her present for what came next. The door opened before I could knock, revealing Marcus in his expensive pajamas, his hair uncombed, his eyes red from what looked like a sleepless night. "Dad, thank God you're here. We need to straighten this whole thing out." "Yes," I said, stepping past him into the foyer. "We do?" Miranda appeared at the top of the stairs, her silk robe pristine despite the early hour. Even in crisis, she maintained her appearance with military precision. She descended slowly, her expression carefully neutral. "Oliver," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "I'm so glad you came back. I think there was a terrible misunderstanding last night." "No misunderstanding," I replied. "Just truth finally coming to light." Marcus gestured toward the living room. "Please, Dad, let's sit down and discuss this like adults." I remained standing. "I'm here to give you a choice, son. Both of you." Miranda's mask slipped slightly. "What kind of choice?" "The kind that will determine the rest of your lives." I pulled a single sheet of paper from my jacket pocket. "This is a resignation letter for Marcus to sign, effective immediately. It also transfers his CEO position to someone I trust, someone who understands the value of loyalty and respect." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Dad, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You see, I realized something last night. I've been enabling your wife's cruelty by allowing you to believe you'd earned your success independently. Every dollar you've made, every bit of authority you've wielded, every luxury you've enjoyed, it all came from a company I built and still own." Miranda stepped forward, her composure cracking. This is blackmail. No, Miranda. This is consequences. You wanted to kick my wife out onto the street because she's beneath your standards. Now, you get to learn exactly who's been keeping you in the style you've become accustomed to." Marcus was shaking his head frantically. "Dad, please, we can work this out. Miranda didn't mean—" "Stop!" My voice cut through his pleading like a knife. "Don't tell me what your wife meant. I heard every word. I saw her look at your mother like she was garbage. I watched you stand there and let it happen." "She was just upset," Miranda interjected. "The surprise visit, the stress of having house guests." "House guests?" I turned to face her fully. "Is that what you call the woman who sold her grandmother's engagement ring to buy your husband his first decent suit for job interviews?" Miranda blinked, clearly having never heard that story. "Or the woman who worked double shifts at the library and cleaned offices at night so Marcus could afford college?" "I didn't know." "You never asked. In 5 years of marriage, you never once asked about the sacrifices that made your comfortable life possible. You just assumed you deserved it all." I turned back to Marcus. "Here's your choice, son. You can sign this resignation letter, apologize sincerely to your mother, and ask Miranda to do the same. If you do that, if you show me there's still some part of the boy I raised inside the man you've become, I'll let you stay on as a department manager with a reasonable salary. And if I don't, then I'll fire you tomorrow morning. I'll hire a new CEO who actually understands respect and family values. And you'll find out exactly what it's like to look for a job when your only reference is the father you disappointed." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see Miranda calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Marcus looked like he might be sick. "You wouldn't destroy your own son's career," Miranda said finally. "I wouldn't destroy it." "He would, by choosing a woman who thinks cruelty is acceptable as long as it's directed at people she considers beneath her." "How much?" she asked suddenly, just like the night before. "How much money do you want to make this go away?" "I don't want your money, Miranda. I want your respect. I want you to understand that the woman you called a gossip raised the man who made your lifestyle possible. I want you to apologize to her with genuine remorse, not because you're afraid of losing your comfort, but because you understand you were wrong." "Fine," she said quickly. "I'll apologize. I'll call her right now and—" "No." I held up my hand. "That's not how this works. You see, I don't believe you. I don't believe you're capable of genuine remorse. You're only sorry you got caught treating someone you thought was powerless with contempt." Marcus found his voice. "Dad, what do you want from us?" "I want you to choose," I said simply. "Right now, in front of me. Are you the son I raised who understands that family means protecting the people you love? Or are you the man your wife has turned you into, who watches his mother get humiliated and blames her for it?" "That's not fair," Miranda protested. "You can't make him choose between his wife and his parents." "I'm not making him choose between people, Miranda. I'm making him choose between values, between gratitude and entitlement, between loyalty and selfishness." I walked to their front window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn that my company's profits had paid for. "You have 5 minutes to decide. Marcus signs the resignation letter, and you both apologize sincerely to Celine, or I make some phone calls that will change your life forever." Behind me, I could hear whispered arguing. Miranda's voice was getting shriller, more desperate. Marcus sounded like he was drowning. After everything I'd given him, every sacrifice Celine and I had made, it should have been an easy choice. But as the minutes ticked by, I began to realize that for the man my son had become, it wasn't easy at all. And that told me everything I needed to know about what came next. The 5 minutes felt like an eternity. I stood at their window watching a neighbor walk his dog down the sidewalk, marveling at how normal the world looked when everything was about to change forever. Behind me, the whispered argument between Marcus and Miranda grew more heated. "You have to sign it," Miranda hissed. "We can't lose everything." "You don't understand," Marcus whispered back. "If I sign that, I'm admitting I was never really successful. I'm admitting that everything we have is charity. It's not charity if you earned it." "But I didn't earn it, Miranda. That's what he's trying to tell us. I've been living a lie." I turned around. My son was sitting in his expensive leather chair, his head in his hands. Miranda stood behind him, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his shoulders. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. "Time's up," I said quietly. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen since he was a child, genuine fear and confusion. "Dad, I need more time to think about this." "No, son. You've had 3 years to think about how to treat the people who love you. You've had your entire adult life to decide whether gratitude or entitlement would define your character." "This isn't fair," Miranda said, her voice rising. "You're manipulating us, using money to control your own family." "I'm using the truth to reveal who you really are," I replied. "And apparently, you're someone who thinks fairness means getting to humiliate my wife without consequences." Marcus stood up slowly, his movements uncertain. "If I sign this, what happens to us? To our house, our cars, our life? That depends entirely on your attitude going forward," I said. "If you show me that you understand what you did wrong, if you make genuine amends with your mother, if you learn to treat people with respect regardless of their bank account, then we can discuss your future with the company. And if we don't," Miranda's voice was sharp with panic, "then you'll discover what it's like to live without the safety net you never knew you had." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my lawyer's number. "I'm going to call Gerald now. He's prepared 3 different versions of a press release announcing changes in Meridian's leadership. Which version I tell him to send depends entirely on what happens in the next 60 seconds. Miranda's composure finally shattered completely. "This is insane. You're destroying your own son over one argument, over a simple disagreement about house guests." "This isn't about house guests, Miranda. This is about character. It's about the fact that when my wife needed shelter, you called her a gossip and suggested she sleep on the street. It's about the fact that my son stood there and let it happen." I started dialing Gerald's number. Marcus watched my fingers move across the screen, each digit sealing his fate. "Wait," he said suddenly. "I'll sign it." Miranda spun around to face him. "Marcus, no, we can fight this. He's bluffing." "No, he's not." Marcus's voice was hollow, defeated. "Look at his face, Miranda. He's not bluffing." I stopped dialing and pulled the resignation letter from my pocket. "Are you sure about this, son?" He took the paper with trembling hands, reading through it one more time. The resignation was effective immediately. His final paycheck would include 2 weeks' severance. His company car, credit cards, and expense account would be terminated by close of business today. "What about our mortgage?" he asked quietly. "The payments are based on my current salary." "That's not my problem anymore," I said. "You'll need to figure out how to live within your actual means, not the means I was providing." "You can't do this to your own son," Miranda said desperately. "Please, Oliver, I'm sorry about last night. I was tired, stressed. I didn't mean any of it." "Yes, you did?" I looked at her with the same expression she'd given Celine, cold, dismissive, final. "You meant every word, you just didn't expect there to be consequences." Marcus signed the letter with a shaking hand, his signature barely legible. As he set down the pen, I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since he was 12 years old. "There," he said bitterly. "Are you happy now?" "No, son, I'm not happy. I'm heartbroken that it came to this." I took the signed letter and folded it carefully into my jacket pocket. "I'll send Gerald the appropriate press release. Effective tomorrow, Sarah Martinez will be the new CEO of Meridian Enterprises." "Sarah?" Marcus looked genuinely shocked. "My assistant, Sarah?" "Your former assistant. And she's not just an assistant, Marcus. She has an MBA from Northwestern and 15 years of corporate experience. She took the assistant position because she wanted to learn the business from the ground up. Unlike some people, she understands that real success comes from earning respect, not inheriting it." Miranda's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into the nearest chair. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." "It's very real," I said, "and it's just the beginning." I walked to their front door, then paused and turned back. "By the way, you'll need to return the company car by 5 o'clock today, and Marcus, your corporate credit cards have already been canceled." "How is that possible?" he asked. "Because I called Gerald before I came over here. I've been planning this conversation since last night." The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You never intended to give me a real choice." You'd already decided. No, son, you decided. Last night, when you watched your wife insult your mother and chose to blame your mother for it. I just provided the consequences. Miranda stood up suddenly, her eyes blazing with rage. You vindictive old man, we'll fight this. We'll sue you for wrongful termination, for emotional distress. For what? For firing my own employee from my own company? I almost smiled. Good luck with that, Miranda. I'll be sure to mention in court how you thought my wife should sleep on the street. Okay. I opened the front door and stepped outside, breathing in the fresh morning air. It felt cleaner somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Dad, Marcus called after me. Please, don't leave it like this. I stopped but didn't turn around. If you ever decide you want to be the man I raised instead of the one she married, you know where to find me. As I walked to my car, I could hear Miranda screaming inside the house, at Marcus, at me, at the universe that had dared to hold her accountable for her cruelty. The sound followed me down their perfect driveway, past their manicured lawn, away from the life they'd built on foundations they'd never bothered to understand. I had one more stop to make before this day was over. One more conversation that would determine whether this family could ever be rebuilt, or if some bridges, once burned, could never be repaired. I found Celine in the hotel restaurant, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She'd been crying. I could tell from the way she kept dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. But she looked up when I approached, and there was something different in her expression. Not the defeated exhaustion I'd seen last night, but a quiet kind of strength. It's done, I said, sitting across from her. She didn't ask for details. After 37 years of marriage, she knew me well enough to read the resolution in my face. How do you feel? Like I should have done it years ago. I reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry, Celine. I'm sorry I let them treat you that way. I'm sorry I waited so long to stand up for you. You were hoping he'd change, she said softly. You wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe in the boy we raised, but that boy is gone, replaced by someone I don't recognize. A comfortable silence settled between us. Outside the window, life continued its normal pace. People heading to work, children waiting for school buses, the world turning as it always had. But inside that hotel restaurant, something fundamental had shifted in the balance of our lives. What happens now? Celine asked. Now, we figure out what the rest of our lives look like. I pulled out my phone and showed her the text I'd received 20 minutes earlier from Sarah Martinez. The new CEO wants to meet with me this afternoon. She has some ideas about expanding the company, maybe opening a division focused on affordable housing reconstruction. Celine's eyes lit up slightly. That sounds meaningful. It does. And the best part is, she understands that business success means nothing if you lose your humanity in the process. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Dad, please call me. Miranda is locked in the bathroom crying. I don't know what to do. I showed the message to Selena. She read it and sighed. He's lost without someone telling him what to think. That's not my problem anymore. But even as I said it, I felt the familiar tug of paternal concern. Marcus was still my son, even if he'd forgotten how to be one. The question was whether he was capable of learning, or if Miranda's influence had poisoned him beyond redemption. 3 days later, we were settling into a furnished apartment across town when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus standing in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept since I'd last seen him. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Celine emerged from the kitchen, took one look at her son, and despite everything that had happened, her maternal instincts kicked in. Marcus, sweetheart, you look terrible. When did you last eat? He almost broke down at the gentle concern in her voice. I don't remember. Everything's falling apart, Mom. The house, the cars, our whole life. It's all gone. Where's Miranda? I asked. Divorce lawyer, he said bitterly. Turns out she's not interested in being married to a man who can't maintain her lifestyle. I felt no satisfaction in hearing it, only sadness for the boy who'd once believed in happy endings. I'm sorry, son. Are you? His voice carried a mix of pain and accusation. Because you got exactly what you wanted. My marriage is over. My career is destroyed. My wife is gone. What I wanted, I said carefully, was for you to remember that your mother deserved basic respect. What I wanted was for you to stand up for the people who love you. I know. The fight went out of him as suddenly as it had appeared. I know I failed. Both of you. I got so caught up in trying to be what Miranda wanted that I forgot who I really was. Celine moved to sit beside him on the couch, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. We all make mistakes, Marcus. The question is whether we learn from them. I want to, he said, his voice breaking. I want to be better. I want to be the man you raised me to be. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus manipulative desperation. What I saw was a broken man who'd finally realized the cost of his choices, not just the financial cost, but the human one. It's going to take time, I said finally. Trust has to be rebuilt slowly. I understand. He looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in years, humility. Could I maybe work for the company again? Not as CEO, obviously. Just somewhere I can prove that I've learned something from all this. I considered his request. Sarah Martinez had mentioned needing someone to oversee the new affordable housing division. Someone who understood construction and had experience managing projects. It would be a significant step down from what Marcus was used to, but it might also be exactly what he needed. There might be something, I said carefully. But it would mean starting over completely. Entry-level position, modest salary. No special treatment because you're my son. I'll take it, he said immediately. Whatever it is, I'll take it. And you'd have to apologize to your mother. Really apologize. Not because you want something from me, but because you understand how badly you hurt her. He turned to Celine, tears finally spilling over. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I let Miranda talk to you that way. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I became someone who could watch you be humiliated and do nothing about it. Celine's own eyes filled with tears. Oh, Marcus, I don't deserve your forgiveness, he continued, but I'm asking for the chance to earn it back. However long it takes, whatever I have to do, I want to be your son again. Your real son, not the selfish stranger I turned into. I watched my wife's face as she processed his words. She'd always been the more forgiving of the two of us, quicker to see the good in people, even when they'd disappointed her. But she'd also been deeply hurt by what had happened, and I knew she needed to see genuine change, not just pretty words. We'll see, she said gently. But Marcus, you have to understand, it's not just about apologizing. It's about changing who you are. It's about choosing to be kind, even when it doesn't benefit you. I understand, he said, and I'll prove it to you. Both of you. 6 months later, I stood in the parking lot of Meridian Enterprises' new affordable housing division, watching Marcus direct a crew of workers rebuilding homes damaged by Hurricane Elena. He'd lost weight, gained calluses, and developed a tan from working outdoors. More importantly, he'd gained something back that I'd thought was lost forever. Integrity. Sarah Martinez walked up beside me, following my gaze. He's doing good work, she said. The crew respects him. More importantly, the families we're helping trust him. He's learning, I said. Finally. Think he'll ever make it back to executive level? I considered the question. Maybe. But I hope by the time he gets there, he'll understand that real success isn't about the title on your business card. It's about whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of who you see. That evening, Marcus joined Celine and me for dinner in our new home. Nothing fancy, but bought with honest money and filled with genuine warmth. As we sat around the kitchen table, sharing stories about our day, I realized something profound had changed in our family dynamic. We were no longer defined by what we could give each other, but by what we chose to give freely. Marcus wasn't trying to impress us with his success. He was simply being present, being grateful, being the son we'd always hoped he could be. Dad, he said as we cleared the dishes, I know I can never really make up for the time I wasted, the pain I caused. But I want you to know, both of you, that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to me. Why? Celine asked. Because it forced me to remember what actually matters. And what matters isn't the size of your house or the price of your car. It's whether the people you love feel loved by you. I looked at this man, my son, but also somehow a stranger I was just getting to know, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of a parent who refuses to see his child's flaws, but the quiet confidence that comes from watching someone choose to become better. The briefcase that had started this whole confrontation now sat in my closet, its contents no longer a weapon, but simply papers, documenting a business built on honest work and fair dealing. I'd learned that real power isn't the ability to control others through wealth or position. It's the strength to stand up for what's right, even when it costs you everything. And as I watched my son help his mother with the dishes, laughing at something she said, treating her with the respect and affection she'd always deserved, I realized that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to discover who they really are beneath all the expectations and pretenses. The storm that had destroyed our house had also washed away the illusions we'd all been living with. What remained was smaller, simpler, but infinitely more real. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough.